Greetings everybody, my name is Tommy the Game Master and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be putting Pheonix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy on trial. Is it worth $30 for HD ports of 3 Game Boy Advance games?
Objection!
Overruled. For those who want to tell me it was originally released for the DS, I have to say you are wrong. The original trilogy was released on the GBA in Japan. We got DS remakes over here in the West. If you have ever played the trilogy on WiiWare like I have, and I wish I had room to hook up my Wii to show you the differences, but the Wii version were definitely Game Boy Advance games blown up on the TV, and they looked plenty fuzzy and jagged in their appearance. I'll talk about what I think of these HD remakes overall later on in the review though. Anyways, Pheonix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy contains 3 of the best visual novel adventures games ever made.
Objection!
Okay, 2 of the best visual novel games I've ever played, with the second one suffering from major middle child syndrome, but I'll get to my problems on that one later. Anyways, let's start by cross-examining the story. Okay, I'm going to start just talking about the way the stories are set up broadly and overall, and then I will talk about each 3 game stories and some of their cases individually later on in this video. So for right now, I'm going to keep it simple. Each game puts you in the titular role of Pheonix Wright, starting out as a rookie attorney to going full-on ace attorney with an impressive win record over some of the most bizarre cases ever known. Assisting him in a little over half the cases will be Maya Fey, who is a spiritual medium who can connect Pheonix to her late sister Mia whenever he needs a little help and guidance from his former mentor. I say half the cases because the other half, Maya is either the suspect in the case and he must get her off, or she's been kidnapped and he has to find a way to rescue her. Yeah, she's the Capcom version of Princess Peach here. In those cases, he gets help and assistance from Pearl Fey, Maya's 9-year-old cousin, who has a few issues of her own. Next to having good mysteries that go from the easy how catch 'em to some really complicated whodunit puzzles, the game also has a really great sense of humor. It knows a lot of the stuff, it's over the top and runs with it. There is a lot of witty dialogue and comic send-ups, and a lot of Phoenix's inner monologue is just hilarious. It knows how to take itself seriously without being too seriously, and know how to be comedic without becoming corny, unlike some other visual novel style games that I know of. That is a difficult thing to do, and Pheonix Wright most of the time manages to do it with flying colors. Most of the time. I'll talk about that second game later. And of course, it's exciting when we see Pheonix and whatever prosecutor he's facing off against match wits with each other in a logic battle, making the game story very compelling.
Objection!
Yeah, I guess I should have mentioned something that people have made hundreds of YouTube videos about. Even real lawyers have taken up the charge to show what Pheonix Wright Ace Attorney does wrong. And I'm here to tell you, they're pretty much right. You don't have to be a real lawyer to pick this game apart. Anyone who's read our Bill of Rights, taken a legal class, or hell, even watched my cousin Vinny once, will be able to tear this game's court system a new one. It is meant to be an over-the-top satire of not only mystery shows like Perry Mason and Matlock, but also a send-up of Japanese court systems. A court system that I have heard if you step into as a defendant, the chances of being convicted are well over 99%. And when it's that high, you could say it might just be a wee bit corrupt. So corrupt that a judge might allow a prosecutor to whip the defense counsel into unconsciousness, in a court system that is very different from America. Capcom of America's way of localizing this is to be commended, but it's not without some humorous faults of its own. Supposedly this game takes place in the 2019 to 2020 time frame, and that would be the not too distant future when you realize these games came out in the mid-2000s era. A 2020 where we haven't invented flip phones yet, we still record stuff on VHS tapes, and we still use CDs to run computer programs on. And obviously the Japanese pop culture we get from anime and video games has managed to infect everything else. At any rate, it's because it's now the future, we have somehow completely rewrote our constitution and legal system to this bizarre hodgepodge of a mess, and one most people who are somewhat educated can really poke fun of. The biggest problem I have to wrap my head around in this dystopian court system is that Pheonix's job isn't to prove that his client is not guilty, he has actually to prove them innocent, which are two very different things. And even beyond that, he has to find someone who actually did the crime in order to get his client off. Just think about how bad that is.
Yes, your attorney has proven that you weren't there at the night of the incident, but since he hasn't proved it was someone else who did it, we're gonna hang you anyways.
Yeah, the author of the dub should have set this in the year 2021, because it might be what our system looks like if COVID-19 pandemic lasts too much longer. At any rate, the story and the gameplay are really one big thing, but I'll walk you through it and render my opinion on the gameplay itself. The game has two scenarios. First up is the investigation scenario, and this one's the least fun of the two. There you will travel to different places and talk to different people, examine areas to look for clues, and even show them to people to get their reactions, and sometimes get more information on said clue when you show it to them. Once you find all the clues and conversations in the investigation has to show you, you will continue on to the courtroom phase, which is a lot more fun. The courtroom phase is where the meat of the gameplay goes, where it's more of a battle type scenario. Basically, you will have to cross-examine witnesses that are on the stand. This works by going through the dialogue, which gives you an option to press them for more information, which is a handy way to get more story and even more dialogue to choose from in their testimony. When you find a line of text that contradicts with the piece of evidence you have, you show that piece of evidence and hear Pheonix shout out his trademark yell of objection. A battle between the prosecution and the witness will play out. Sometimes Pheonix will have to show more evidence when prompted or tell his theory of what he thinks happens in order for you to move on to then testifying about something else to repeat the process until you get out of the trial phase and back to the investigation. Most cases have 2 days of investigation and 2 days of trial. So what's my opinion on that? Investigations are the weakest part of the game in my opinion. That's not to say they're not fun. Most of the time, figuring out and collecting the clues and figuring out what happened is a good part of any mystery novel, and the storytelling and conversations are usually really tight. But like a lot of the visual adventure games that Pheonix Wright is based on, you can sometimes get caught up on not hitting the right area or showing off the right piece of information to continue on, and this can get frustrating. Starting with the second game though, you will get psych locks that you have to break by showing off evidence and having a battle of wits against the witness who is lying for you to get them to tell them the whole truth so you can move on with the story. I like this mechanic. It makes these investigations more interesting, as well as oftentimes points you in the direction of the clues you should be looking for. As far as the court battles go, these are a lot more interesting. Pressing the witnesses to find out more information and trying to use what they are saying and the evidence you have to point out contradictions and find out what is going on is really fun. And there is some really good humor going on, especially when you screw up sometimes. And of course, when you find the contradiction, seeing the scene of Pheonix yelling objection and the corresponding 3 or 4 way arguments that start to play out are, like I said, extremely entertaining, especially when Pheonix manages to corner the killer. Some of the reactions and sound effects make it feel like it's more part of a fighting game like Street Fighter. It makes Pheonix seem so strong he could be a superhero, teaming up with the Avengers to take down Galactus.
Squash you like the bug that you are.
Getting something?
You win!
Objection!
Yeah, you're kind of right there. He gets his ass handed to him several times through the course of this trilogy. His most savage beating comes from a 9-year-old girl. Anyways, these scenes are fun, but they're not perfect. You will run into occasions where you may have 2 pieces of information or you might have 2 lines of dialogue that could fit in with a piece of information, but the game might only accept one. And when these happen, or other times when it might be a bit obscure what exactly you need to be pressing or presenting, and when these situations occur, and they do occur, it can lead you to do this. My new favorite meme. Fortunately, there is a quick save feature that lets you save pretty much any place in the game. I suggest abusing the hell out of it so you don't have to worry about being set back if you make those type of mistakes, because in the court battle scenes you do have health, and if you make too many mistakes, then Pheonix will be thrown out of court, and the person Pheonix is defending will be declared guilty and sent up the river. After going through 2 or 3 days of trial, you will get a not guilty verdict, usually with one exception, for your client, and move on to the next case. I kind of wish I had room to hook up my Wii U right now just so I can record footage to show you the difference between the SD and HD versions of this game. Capcom, for the most part, did a really great job upgrading the game. It's what an HD version of this type of game is supposed to do. Upgrade it, but not really change it. All the characters you know and love from the DS are here, and they look the same. But Capcom went and redrew and repainted them to make it look like they're HD images. They do have some awkwardness when it comes to the lack of animation on some of them, but for the most part, it's really good.
Objection!
Yes, I will admit they are a bit bright and a bit smooth to look at when blown up on a big computer screen, and it does have this definitely made for a portable screen feel, but since Pheonix Wright was always designed for the handhelds, I will forgive it this flaw. And at any rate, it still looks way better than the sorry excuse from an HD port with the world's worst Photoshop smoothing filter applied over it. While Capcom did a really great job redoing the graphics, they unfortunately didn't touch the sound or music, which is a bit of a problem. It still sounds like Game Boy Advance music. While I'm not expecting this remake to have voice acting by any means, I wouldn't mind having the music remastered. It still has the boops and beeps of the Game Boy Advance, and it can get really annoying to listen to after a short time. Here, take a listen. Yeah, it's not the worst, but it's far from the best, and I wish they could have touched that up just a little bit more, but it is a nitpick. Anyways, before I'm going to head out and tell you my final recommendation of whether or not you should pick up this trilogy, let's talk about the games individually. Oh, and yes, while I'm not going to go out of my way to completely spoil the games for you, there are going to be quite a few plot spoilers up ahead, so if you want to click off this video, feel free to right now. Okay, so the original Pheonix Wright game is a pretty decent, if by the books, mystery game. No large curveballs are thrown in, but that's okay. You're establishing the world and the characters and the gameplay, and the script does just that. Starting out with Pheonix trying to get his friend Larry Butts out of a murder charge, and taking guidance from his mentor Mia Fey as an excellent tutorial case starts off the series. Then when you get your first real case, Pheonix finds out that his mentor's been killed, and the person who is most likely suspect is Mia's younger sister, Maya, who Pheonix decides to defend, and the person he is defending against is Miles Edwards, Phoenix's childhood friend, and if you can't tell by the design, is now an arrogant, self-centered douchebag, and Pheonix is out to figure out what happened to him. About 2 cases later, and the big case for the game opens up, putting Edwards in the defendant's chair, and he is now a client of Pheonix, and Pheonix having to figure out what happened in a new case that Edward is charged with murder, plus a case that happened when Edward was still a kid that is still traumatizing him. It also means Pheonix has to challenge Manfred von Karma, and yes, he looks like Emperor Palpatine enough to scream that he's the villain, and yes, he does turn out to be the murderer in both cases, but I will forgive the game for that cliche because what he's guilty of and why he's guilty is a refreshing surprise, and the way you have to put it together when it comes to the gameplay is pretty fun. But since they are doing the HD ports of the DS game here, we also get an extra filler case at the end of the game. Yes, there isn't even a credit roll and an epilogue, but I do encourage you to stay after it because the extra case thrown here isn't a small one. All told, I say it adds an extra 2/3 more gaming time. It's bigger than the quote epic long case that is at the end of the original game. And it was using a lot of what the DS has to offer. Simple 3D mechanics, having to do things like blow dust off the screen to uncover prints, even actual animation and video. While it adds nothing to the overall series and it's an obvious filler, it's a great case and a nice addition. Now for that second game, Justice for All, that everyone hates so much. Well, it's not terrible, but it does add things like the sidelock system, and the second case is actually very important for the third game. But that's pretty much it. The prosecutor Pheonix will be fighting through most of his cases will be Franziska von Karma, the most notorious person in video games to use a whip and not be related to the Belmont clan or to do any vampire hunting. But that's kind of the problem, because outside of the whip and the slapstick that can happen if Pheonix throws out a wrong answer, causing her to beat him to unconsciousness, she doesn't have much of a character other than that. She's a brat. She likes to be rude by calling people their full names, and she likes to use tongue twisters when calling people fools, and that's her character. She is supposed to be related to the main villain from the first game, and while it was no mystery he was the villain, he was at least an intimidating threat. She's just annoying. But I think the big problem with this game people has is the final case, and oh yeah, I'm going to go into full plot spoiler here to explain what the many problems are, and I'm assuming that anybody who has played the game understands what I'm about to say. In the final case, Maya gets kidnapped again, meaning this is the third time already Pheonix has to do in some way to pull her bacon out of the fryer. It's also the second time in this entire game that he has to do it. But that doesn't matter. Anyways, the person who kidnapped her is an assassin who was hired by a big action star, and due to a screw-up, his client is now being accused of actually doing the murder. Along the way, Pheonix finds out said movie star is actually a sociopathic person and doesn't care about anybody else but him, and that's why he hired the assassin. Well, the good news is Miles Edwards has returned and is helping Pheonix figure things out by taking up the role of prosecutor of the case, hoping that the two of them together can figure out what is going on and find a way to save Maya. And we as the audience get to take a break from Von Karma. Now, I applaud what they were trying to do. Every now and then, Matlock or Perry Mason would be thrown a case like this, a case where they find out the defendant they're representing is a murdering, lying slimeball and should not be released back to the public, and have to figure out how to make sure they get the sentence they deserve while still being the defense attorney they were hired to be. And the game goes even so far as to get the game two endings. There is actually a bad ending where if you don't show the right evidence to the assassin over a transmitter here, Pheonix will end up getting an innocent woman with mental and emotional problems the death sentence while letting the killer go free, and ultimately end up becoming a lost soul because of it. But the solution here is to show the assassin that his client recorded a video showing him killing the guy that he was hired to kill. So you're saying, well, if he's a secret assassin, he would want to keep who he is in his trade secret, and that might be why he'd be willing to release Maya after the guy betrayed him, and that all makes sense. Well, here's the problem. The way they set up this assassin character just flat out sucks. First, his name is The Killer, which I'm almost willing to forgive because this trilogy goes all in for the bad name puns. So much if they got any worse, I would expect a cameo from Moose and Squirrel. I mean, you have Will Powers, Jackhammer, and my favorite, Wendy Oldbag. It's part of the humor. You have to take these seriously because these are murder mysteries, but not too seriously because they're still supposed to be fun and have a sense of humor to them. But still, that's a bit obvious, but worse is his design, is that of a James Bond villain reject with those stitches on his face, which again I would be glad to overlook and just say Pheonix Wright anime logic and limited Game Boy Advance space to create the characters of the game itself didn't draw attention to the fact that this guy's face looks weird with those stitches on it, and Pheonix has to cross-examine testimony to try to debunk someone saying that there was a weird bellhop going in and out of the hotel rooms where the murder occurred that night. On top of that, his secret's out because he's seen in person by Pheonix, Maya, Miles, and quite a few other witnesses. At this point, the videotape doesn't matter. Your ability to keep yourself secret has gone. And the logic in this case is just busted. It's unfortunate that they botched it up so much. It would have been a really fun case and had a really good moral dilemma for our heroes, but it just really boils down to a whole bunch of stupid. If only they had a good villain in the ending, like the villain in the upcoming game. Oh well, the ending to this is still way better than the ending of Ace Apollo, am I right? Then finally, there is my favorite game, Trials and Tribulations. This game is just a blast, and all the cases are memorably weird with some of the most memorable characters, even if a few of them are for the wrong reasons. Yikes! And it has Pheonix face off against the most dangerous villain in the entire series, Dahlia Hawthorne. Oh, you're telling me this pretty girl doesn't look like a villain? Ah, you poor, sweet, naive, deluded child. She's first introduced to us in a flashback case where you play as Mia Fey as she tries to get a teenage Pheonix Wright off the hook for murder, and during the course of the trial, we find out that Dahlia here has committed quite a few homicides, and Pheonix was her next target. This woman can kill someone and not even bat an eye on it, and we have a few other flashback cases in this game to go on and prove just how cold-blooded she is. And that's the thing, the way they set her up, she looks normal and serene, almost harmless, but at the same time too normal, too harmless, almost to the point of being an alien. And then when you find out what she's capable of, she becomes a truly threatening villain, one that you could see take extraordinary lengths to hide her identity in crimes. And the way she pops up in the final case to haunt Pheonix one last time, both figuratively and literally, and just takes the entire cast on a wild ride is so good that I don't want to spoil it too much. But I will say this when it comes to the final case, is that this is supposed to be the series' homage to Sherlock Holmes' The Final Problem. So much that it even has Pheonix falling from a great distance into a body of water. Fortunately, he survives and is able to appear in a court a day or two later, but that's just start. The game announces that this is the closing act when this case begins. It closes all the small mysteries that whirl around Maya and her family. It pulls together the prosecutors Edward, Von Karma, and Godot. And oh yeah, I forgot to talk about Godot. He is an interesting character for the prosecutor and rival for Pheonix to take on in each of his cases here. Godot is a completely new character with no past history with Pheonix or anyone he knows, but he seems to hate Pheonix with a passion, and with each case you close, you learn more about him and ultimately get an understanding of why he hates Pheonix so much. Just like Dahlia, the more he shows up, the more rounded out he gets, making him probably the best prosecutor in the series, and someone who becomes a bit of a sympathetic villain later on. At any rate, when I said the last case in the game is supposed to be Phoenix's final problems, but a lot like Sherlock Holmes, when Capcom decided to release him out of Japan, he became popular enough to warrant new games, plus an anime, plus a live-action movie, plus a musical, and they decided to continue his adventures. And like Sherlock Holmes, his new adventures commence after a time skip. And unfortunately, also like Holmes, the story post-skip, while still fun, just aren't as good or charming as the originals. Is Pheonix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy worth getting? Well, it has 70 hours of gameplay. Most of the cases are well written. It has plenty of great humor and some addicting gameplay. So yeah, I would say it's worth $30 if you have never played the original games.
Objection!
Ah, cram it, Von Karma. I sent you to bang your head while I put up my thumbnails. If you have played these before, it is worth getting these games again. I forgot how good these games were after almost a decade of not playing them. With that said, if you've gone through these before, wait for a sale. I myself picked this collection up for $15, and $15 was an even better deal on it. But it's worth playing regardless. This is Tommy the Game Master. Thank you for watching this really long video. If you have any comments on it, feel free to leave them down below. I'll talk to you guys later.